Welcome back to another episode of Unpacked. We are so glad that you're joining us today, and we want to invite you to join this conversation. I'm here with my friend Cheryl Roseborough, and we are going to chat about what we've been talking about the past couple of weeks on peace and how to navigate the times, and also forgiveness. You know, how do we have all this peace? How do we see all the things that we're seeing, experiencing, feeling, and still are able to forgive one another, to forgive our friends, to forgive our family? And so would you just join our conversation today? I'd love to hear your feedback as well of how are you navigating forgiveness in these times? Cheryl, I'm so glad you're with us.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so
Very
glad
excited.
you're with us today. I know forgiveness is something that you have, it's been on your heart.
Sure we can't
lately.
skip it?
Okay. We don't have to start with it, but you know, we have been talking the past couple of weeks about peace and how you have to have it as an anchor, you know, because these times are so tough. And it seems like when one thing simmers down, right, then something else pops up, and it seems like 2020 just needs a do-over.
Yes.
You know, and an entire do-over. But, you know, I was talking with Lisa last week about losing friends over just the different things, over racism, over politics, all that. Like, we're losing loved ones, not by death, but by friendship.
Yeah, we are.
And how do we forgive one another when we're hurt by them? Right? Because that's a big deal. You know, to ask somebody to forgive something, no matter what it is, that's a big thing. That's a big thing for somebody to ask.
It is. It's interesting. I was even having this conversation just yesterday about forgiveness because I was watching some things on social media, you know, and I was watching, even it was one of my high school friends, and there was some banter back and forth and some really horrible negative things that were being said. And I felt this anxiety and bitterness building up inside of me. And God said, my peace I leave with you.
Come on.
And so I had to get back into that posture and say, okay, God, this is just a moment.
Yeah.
This is how she feels. This is what she's dealing with, the magnitude of whatever's going on in her life. I can't take that personally.
Yeah.
I can't put that on me. That's just her thoughts, her actions, her feelings.
Yeah.
Love her with the love of Christ, just as Christ has called us to be. And so, you know, you end up sending a message and saying, hey, okay, what you said was very offensive. Find a way that you can say it in kindness.
Yeah.
And so I told her, you know, hey, what you shared actually was not correct. Actually, first it was misinformation.
Yeah.
And then second of all, the way you said it, I don't think that you recognize the magnitude of who you were hurting by saying that.
Yeah.
You know, because we grew up one of the few African-American families in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
So to see a lot of what I'm experiencing now, it kind of saddens me because I'm watching these people now express themselves in ways that it's hurtful. It's very hurtful. And so God is just teaching me to love them right where they're at, but just to pray for them because it's not for me to change it.
Would you consider them a friend?
Ooh, gosh, that's a good question.
See,
so
there's a difference.
They used to be friends.
They used to be friends.
And I had to come to the conclusion that we may not agree. And let me go back to the friend.
Yeah.
She actually sent me a message and said, hey, you know what? I respect what you said.
Yeah.
I really value and appreciate you for what you said. But that doesn't mean that we can come back together in that same manner because you've shown me who you are.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that I still can't love you with the love of Christ, but I know that I can keep my distance.
We're going to have some healthy boundaries.
Yes, very.
So it's safe to say that, you know, do we lose the friendship role and now we're an acquaintance, or we could still be friends, but I just know where to place you, or I just have to put in healthy boundaries. You're my friend on this level. You're my friend with these parameters now, just because I know who you are. You've shown yourself. Would you, you know what I mean? Or do we distance ourselves? Because it's hard. You know, we've been talking the past few weeks about how to navigate your friends and your feelings during this time, because it seems like so many people are exposing themselves and yet having to love them with the love of the Lord and still having the mind of Christ and still being very steadfast in who God's called you to be. But yet you still have these human feelings. You still have these human connections. And we were talking a couple of weeks ago with Lisa that do you throw away the entire friendship? Does everything go away because of this one thing? Or can we keep these friendships, but on a limited, with parameters, with boundaries? What do you think?
Well, number one, I think you have to step back and think about how are you moving? Are you moving with emotional intelligence? Because that's a big key piece of it.
Yep, very good.
Because we are in such a very highly emotional time period within our country that everybody is on an emotional high. You 100%. Say hi and then somebody says racism. You say bye and somebody says, I don't like you or whatever, so many things. Yeah. So I think the big piece to step back is look at yourself internally and get your own inner peace and say, okay, let me make a decision using emotional intelligence first before I decide to just jump right in. I use that thing. It's called, I'm an Enneagram 1.
Yep, I know you are.
Wing 2. Yep. And so that perfectionist reformer that's always in me, I was trying to perfect and reform. And so I had to do something that's called, the SNAP method, stop, notice, ask, and pivot.
Yes.
And so I have to really step back and say, okay, I'm asking myself the hard questions. Because if you're not asking yourself all the hard questions, you're not being authentic to yourself.
That's right.
And I'm having to ask myself a lot of hard questions right now.
But that's maturity.
Well, I hope so. Yeah. I pray so. Yeah. But even with COVID, even with everything, so all of this stuff is happening right in the middle of a very trying time. Yep. On top of that, even when COVID started, I was finishing up my last semester of graduate school at 50. Lord, thank God.
In which you graduated.
Woo, thank God. I'm done.
Good job.
But it was, in the midst of all of this, I remember God telling me the very first day when COVID started, and I remember sitting at my computer, he said, I'm speaking, are you listening? And I feel like we're in such a landscape of people not listening still because they don't want to, and I have to say for myself too, I can't excuse myself out of that. For a minute, I'm like, yeah, God, I'm listening. Sure, I'm listening. He's like, but are you really listening? I had to go back to the scripture, 1 Samuel chapter 3, when Eli was asking Samuel. He kept going back because he kept thinking he was hearing God and he was hearing the prophet.
That's right.
And he finally was just like, the next time you hear that, say, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. And then God gave him a word. So are we stepping back ourselves and saying, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening? And I had to do a lot of introspective of myself consistently in that moment of asking myself, okay, Shirley, you really listening to God? Are you doing God or are you doing you? Because most times I want to do me.
Yeah. Everybody wants to do them because it's easy.
Yeah. And then that obedience kicks in at some point, you know? And so I don't know, it's tough. It's not just an answer like, okay, this is the perfect answer for that because it really depends on the situation. There's some people I won't be friends with anymore, but I'll still love you right where you're at.
And it is what it is.
It is. Just watching the negativity our brains are wired to only take in so much negativity.
For sure.
And so when we're being fed this all day, every day, it's not healthy.
But what's interesting is negativity almost seems like a drug.
Yeah.
An addictive prescription because people want more.
Yes.
They're almost addicted to it. Like they know it's wrong, but it's like, oh, okay, give me more. 10 more minutes. Let me just watch 15 more minutes, Let me just stay on social media another 20 more minutes, like I'll stop scrolling. No matter what's on there, even if it's negative, you just kind of keep feeding that thing. And so to even be in a place to say, the Lord is saying to you, are you listening? It could be hard for a lot of people to hear what God is saying if we're filling our mind, our heart, our soul, our ears with what everybody else is saying, what the people on social media is saying, what the news is saying, what your neighbors are saying, what your family is saying. All of these have impact and influence on you and how you think and how you adjust your thinking. And you're right. And you know what? You are right. Just jump on the bandwagon, right? And so when you have all these voices in your head, then how do you know which one is God's?
That takes that is the maturity part where you have to get quiet and get in God's presence.
That's right.
My time is usually at 5 a.m. in the morning. And
God
I've done
bless
that
you,
for
honey.
years.
Yes,
Well,
honey.
but I'm in bed by 9.
Okay.
So the 5 a.m. Yeah, I get up
yes.
at 5 a.m. But that's when God has spoken to me for
My
years.
garden even isn't awake at 5
I
a.m.
know. Well, my son used to tell me Jesus isn't even awake at 5 a.m. But that's always been my time. That is my consecrated time with God. That's when he speaks to me, gives me instruction, and he deals with me a lot.
Yeah.
And so when I get up at 5 a.m., I know for a moment I got in the habit of start scrolling on social media. Mm-hmm. And so then I start, you pick up and you think, oh,
I'm just going to look at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, is that Facebook?
Yeah.
Is that Instagram? What
And
are you doing?
I don't even have the app downloaded on my phone. So I have to intentionally go.
Oh, that makes it even worse.
It does. It makes it even worse. Yeah. And so, but for, Instagram, of course, it's loaded, but for Facebook, it's not loaded on my phone. And so I had to step back because I found myself that being the first thing that I do before I even get in God's presence. Yeah. And I'm praying and singing as I'm searching, but then I'm like, oh, well, that's a really cute outfit, or that's this, right. Or man, they had that even and didn't invite anybody else. And so you get in, so you start picking up that negativity before you even, so I had to say, stop.
Yep.
Just stop. Don't even do it. And I do a day, I call them, I get in these moments of where I just fast, a fasted lifestyle. Nice. So I pick a day that I fast from certain things.
Yeah.
And I've gotten in the habit of, even after Chadwick Boseman died, and that just broke my heart. Mm-hmm. I fasted I just got off all social media for almost 2 weeks because it was, my whole news feed was full of it. Yes. And my heart was just grieving. It's heavy, I said, let me just stop this. And so I got off for a couple of weeks, but I do it periodically anyway. Yeah. I develop a lifestyle about once or every now and then, about once a quarter, I get off for a few weeks.
And isn't it great? I think that, social media has become like a food of sorts for people. It has. It's become a source. It's become an entertainment nourishment, for certain folks. And so I think fasting from that is a great thing. Typically in church growing up, you push your plate back, you do this, but really some people with dietary restrictions really can't push a plate back, but you can stop what is taking your time away from the Lord.
Mm-hmm. And that was taking my time. Yeah. But you said it best. You have to think about the people that don't have any family and that don't have anyone around them. To them, that is their family. That is something that keeps them fed on a daily basis. Yeah. But for people like me, of course, I'm in marketing and advertising for years. I realized that, okay, this is starting to consume your time. Yeah. When you're on there for hours, take a break. Uh-huh. So
it is. Do that. And I think that it just convolutes your thought process and your spirit, man, to really, I think sometimes when we have so many voices in our heads, so many people's opinions, so many people's thoughts, so many people's feelings, and then we're trying to hear from God and we're trying to pray. It's almost like sometimes those things get muddied and they start to mesh together. And so now we have people's feelings and thoughts, and then we're trying to hear from God, and it is all kind of right. And then when we feel like, oh, I've heard from the Lord, but then some of it is just all really mixed in. Yeah. And is it really truly from the Lord? Right? So we then form our own sort of concocted opinion, and God is saying, well, no, I really didn't say that, but it comes down to being honest, like what you were saying is,
And when you have a specific gift, it's like you can't function and focus on that gift when you're over here 100%. Doing this. So because if you want God to speak to you clearly, it's not going to happen in that way. So I've found a way to creating those healthy boundaries consistently. But then also too, in that's where God is always speaking to me, like we talked about about things that I needed to deal with, because in those moments, it's like, okay, here's the forgiveness. Here's the bitterness that you're dealing with. 100%. Here's the anger that you're dealing with. I consider those incubator moments. So when I was born, I was 2 months preemie.
Come on,
and
Preemie.
so, and I'm
But
healthy.
you're so cute
yeah.
now.
Thank you. You would never be able to tell it now.
No.
But so I remember I asked my mom this question because it happened in a moment last year when I had a really bad season of something happening in my life.
Yep.
And it was pretty traumatic, and it was right before I was getting ready to speak at a conference.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't understand it at the time.
Yeah.
And God said, I'm putting you in an incubator. And so I started asking my mom questions. Well, how long was I there? And my mom's like, well, I'm not for certain. I asked my dad. He wasn't for certain.
Mm-hmm.
They said, I think it was about 2 months.
Yeah.
So back in those days, that dating myself again, he said they would have to keep you until the time of your actual due date.
For sure.
And so God spoke to me in that season, and he said, an incubator is to do 2 things.
Come on.
It's supposed to be for growth and for protection.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I recognized is when God put me back in that incubator, he said, number one, I've got to strategically put you in a place so I can speak to you and pull out all of this junk that is hindering you and harboring your ability to forgive and blocking you from doing what you need to do in the kingdom, because your kingdom purpose can't shine because your character is not caught up to that anointing. Yeah. So you need to step back. Let me put you in this posture. Let me put you in this position. Number one, on your face is really where your posture should be. Yep. And let me speak to you and let me get to the deep, dark crevices of your soul and heal you. Because if I don't heal you here, all you're going to do is when you stand up on that stage is bleed.
That's right.
And no one can hear anything that you're saying because you're killing the people on the very place that you're supposed to be feeding. So he put me in that place and said, okay, you need to forgive them for this.
Yes.
And so that person had brutally wounded me, and God said, I can't have you on this stage feeding my children,
or
my
bleeding
people,
on your children.
and bleeding on your children.
With
if
all
you
that
have
unforgiveness.
with all that unforgiveness. Yes. And I cried and I worshiped and I cried and I worshiped and I cried and I worshiped until I couldn't anymore. And then God was like, okay, now let me get you. Let's get this. Let's deal with this.
You know, Cheryl, forgiveness is almost really more for, than it is
for the other person.
For the other person, it's really more for you, and you can't. It blocks you from moving forward. It just really does. And so when you allow unforgiveness to sort of hold you back, and you can't move forward, then you've almost made it an idol. Yeah.
And it was an idol. It was like you said earlier, it was like a drug for me. It was like what was my functioning every day. It's like, I'm going to hold on to this. Yeah. It was because then it becomes pride and ego and everything. And so I was walking around with that, with the badge of honor. Yeah. I'm not going to forgive you. No, you have really hurt me. Yep. I don't want to talk to you.
Because it makes you feel better.
Makes me feel
real
good.
Feel good.
For the moment.
Yeah, for the moment. Because you get to hold on to something. Yeah. You know, you get to own it and be like, no, I got this over you. This.
And then it's saying to God, I got this. I got this. I don't need you. I got this. I can work this all out. Yep. It's like, okay. And it's like God sitting over there like, oh, you don't need me? Yeah. Okay, go ahead and keep doing you. Yeah. And that was the beginning of just the forgiveness piece for me. That was the first day, and then ended up talking to the person like a few weeks later. And by the time I talked to them, God allowed me to have love in my heart again for that person, despite what they had did. Yep. And now I'm still not saying I haven't completely walked through it. It took me.
It takes time.
It does take time.
That takes time to do.
Even in Israel, in January of this year, God was dealing with me again on the plane and said,
"That's right, you went to Israel this year."
I did. He said, if there's going to be any reconciliation, if there's going to be any restoration, because you remember I put ministry on the shelf.
I know it.
I was done. I had nothing left in me. I was like, God.
And yet you have so much in you.
But I had nothing. I felt like I had nothing to give in that moment. Woo. It was,
it's okay.
It was a tough moment.
Yeah, I know it was.
But I remember God just wrapping his arms around me and saying, I've got you. If you just hold on, I've got you. So I remember when I was in Israel and I am standing I'm standing at the very place where Jesus looked over at the city and he wept. Yep. And of course it's freezing cold. I'm expecting it to be beautiful weather in January.
Wrong country.
and
that's
and
Australia.
So, well, next year will be my trip to Australia.
Yeah, that's their summer.
And so I remember God just really speaking to me. And it was really moments of really getting on my knees.
Yeah.
It was major moments of knees. My knees were raw by the time I left Israel. But he said, I need to take you to a place where I can heal you.
Yeah.
So taking me to the very place. So here I am excited. I'm like, oh, I'm going to the place where Jesus walked. I'm so excited. And he's like, this poor child, she doesn't really realize what's about to happen. And I'm on the plane and God said, as clear as day, I'm about to speak and I'm going to need you to do a whole lot of listening and no talking. And so
before you go on, I want you to hold that thought, because isn't that just what you said just now is so important. We love to do a lot of talking and less listening. And God is like, I can't even get a word in edgewise because you keep talking. Not you per se, but just, keep talking. Right? But he wants to speak to us. You know, he wants to work in those deep, hard areas that you're saying. Like he wants to, because it does nothing but block us. It's the biggest, unforgiveness is the biggest hindering block there is.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, continue.
But yes, so I remember we were in one of the hotel rooms, and because we went to stayed in several different hotel rooms, and saw the biggest amount of forgiveness. We had 2 different tour guides. And so, you know, I really got an opportunity to see what it's like on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, we've met the most amazing, beautiful people on both sides of the fence. And I don't understand God. And he said, but that's just because that's the nature of human. That's human nature.
100%.
And so I remember we're sitting in a circle right before we're getting ready to leave. Now, mind you, at this point, I'm kind of a little frustrated about some things that had happened on the trip. I didn't even want to go to the last session. And it's all, what do you think about this trip? Because the trip started so beautiful, but it ended so tough. And so at the end of the trip, we're all in a circle and we're having this conversation. And I looked the lady in the face and I said, if you really go spend some time, you might see he's the most beautiful person you could have ever met in your life. We love him. We've grown to love him. And God said, well, what about some of my people that are the most beautiful people? Why have you not taken the time to step back and look and say, again, it's just a moment, or it's, you don't, you know, you got to look at their life. What has happened in their past? You're being so judgmental because you want to hold on to this unforgiveness, and unforgiveness causes a lot of medical issues as well too.
Does.
And so
it's stressful.
It is very stressful, very, very stressful. Weight gain, all of that.
Yes, it
and
does.
So,
it does.
and that was what part of it in the last year, because I'd been holding on to that unforgiveness. Part of it was graduate school, but part of it was stress and unforgiveness that I just did not want to let go of.
So let me ask you this. Did you ever go back and say, when the Lord told you to be quiet, I'm going to speak?
Oh, I had to be quiet.
You had to be quiet. Did he speak this whole trip?
He spoke every
the
morning.
Whole trip.
The whole trip. The whole entire trip, God spoke.
Yeah.
And it would be, okay, because of course on a different time zone. So I had no clue what time it was. But the most interesting thing is when I was on the camel, I was riding on a camel.
Come on, camel.
And I'm riding on the camel and we're riding and we're in this beautiful place. And I'm riding on the camel and we get off and he said, okay, I'm going to speak. And so when I'm walking down, and it's a picture I remember posting, it was one of the only pictures I posted while in Israel. And it's all of us walking, we're all from different walks of life. And I remember posting that picture and God said, you all have different walks. You're all here for a different reason. But the most important thing is that everybody's going to get to me.
That's so
no matter how they're going to get to me. And so when we go around the corner and then they take us to the place where they believe where John the Baptist was beheaded. And so, and I'm standing there looking at all of this stuff and I'm like, how free are we to live where we're living and to be?
Oh, absolutely.
It was so many moments of that God spoke to me. But the biggest thing was just really, truly, he was like, not only that, you need to forgive yourself, Cheryl.
100%. Listen, it's such a big deal. It is such a big deal. Forgiveness, people take that, like they don't appreciate the value of forgiveness and what it does and how impactful it is in a person's soul. It's one of the most freeing things a person can do is forgive.
It is.
And really, to forgive somebody is to say that, you know, I am not going to allow what you did or said or acted control me.
Control my decisions.
Control my life. Control my mindset. Control the rest of my life. That's what forgiveness is. It doesn't mean that you're going to forget. Yeah. And most of us have to realize, like, it's a decision you have to make, you know, that we have to allow the Holy Spirit to help us.
Yeah.
But forgiveness in human nature is a hard thing.
Yeah, it is.
For someone to do, or even to ask someone to do, but it's a godly thing, you know? And so for it to be something so big and so hard to do, it's one of the most freeing.
It is freeing.
You
it
know?
is. And it's interesting because we go back to the person from last year when God spoke to me and said, okay, so are you ready to listen about your part? And literally I broke. And he was just like, this was your part in that.
Oh.
And I had to go back and ask that person to forgive me. And I said, you know what? I am so sorry.
Yep.
Because, you know, I'm a recovering control freak, you know, so I'll always be in recovery. You know, that's a perfectionist reformer part of me that's always going to.
That's really funny.
I'm in recovery
for sure.
that because,
you know,
things have happened in our life. I'm protecting myself.
100%.
I didn't really realize how much was my protective mechanism of Cheryl was like, I don't want anybody to hurt me.
Yeah.
So there's nobody protecting me, so I've got to protect myself.
Yeah.
God's not even protecting me, so I have to protect me.
I've got to protect me.
And not realizing that God's been every step of the way protecting me. And so when I went back and said, not once, not twice, but 3 times I had to go when God showed me, this was your part in this.
Yeah.
Because I was putting it all on them.
And isn't that the thing, is sometimes he has to show us. He has to show us, like, no, you did this, but we have to be humble and have an ear to hear.
And a spirit to
And
receive.
we got
and a
to
heart
be teachable,
to move.
100%. So if we don't have that, then it's hard for us to actually make the change that we need.
Well, and that was the part I asked. I said, Lord, give me ear to hear, a spirit to receive, and a heart to move. Well,
I love it.
What was I thinking when I asked that? When I
he
said
gave it to
I
you.
asked for it.
Yeah,
I
he
asked
gave it
for
to you.
And then there's the scripture in there, Juliet, that I've been reading this week, where it's just like, here I am, Lord, send me. So if you're asking God to send you,
then he's going to do it.
Then what? But you got to do
the
the work and be ready to deal with yourself in order for God to use you.
How many of us have said those same things and those same prayers? Lord, send me. How many of us have had trouble with forgiveness and unforgiveness and just that struggle and that battle? All of us have. Every one of us have. But you know what? God wants to use that to free you. I want to thank you, Cheryl, for being with us today. We've got to close out for now, but I'd love for you to come back.
Yes,
I'd love for us to continue.
Yes.
Would you do that?
Yes, I will do that.
Awesome. Would you join us next week for another great episode of Unpacked?